Good morning, good day, good night. I don't know where you are, but I guess everyone's here today, really waiting for our last episode of a BioVerse of 2025. Today is really my great honor to have two very good friends and absolutely heavyweight in the Asian biotech space to join me for today's webinar. If you don't know who we are, let me get started a little bit about ourselves. And before that, let me just share some slides and tell you what we're going to talk about today. All right, so this is our signature episode of a BioVerse every year. The last episode of a BioVerse, we always do an annual review of Asian biotech. Obviously, 2025, China biotech really comes of age. Actually, I would say take the central stage. That's what we're going to focus on today. Like I said, if you are new to BioVerse, let me share with you who we are. BioVerse, we believe where science sparks business in medicines. And this is a monthly webinar co-produced by In Science We Trust community, SAPA GP, and BioSpark. So we are three US-based nonprofit. First, In Science We Trust community, which by the way, created BioVerse. This is a nonprofit based in New Jersey. We have more than 4,000 members. We do a weekly newsletter. We do monthly webinars where we are today. And we have a lot of in-person events through the different chapters. We have a chapter in Boston. That's where I am right now. But my home base in New Jersey. That means that we have another chapter in New York, have a chapter in London, chapter in Shanghai, and one in San Francisco. SAPA GP is probably the most established, the largest ethnic Chinese-focused pharmaceutical professional association, and we are working with the Philly chapter of SAPA. BioSpark, actually based in Boston, where I am right now. It's like a focus on R&D and academic research biotech organization, nonprofit organization. With that being said, quickly housekeeping item. Disclosure, the speaker's opinion are their own, should not take their advice for investment opportunities. And their opinion also do not represent the position of either BioVerse, iSuite community, SAPA GP, or BioSpark group. With that out of the way, today is really my great pleasure to have both Jens and Frank join me for this, like I said, signature events of BioVerse webinar series. With that being said, I would like to first invite Jens to say a few words about yourself.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. So I'm Jens Norhave. I'm responsible for corporate development here at HengRui Pharmaceuticals, and I've been with HengRui about a year now, and a year and a month, I think. So very hectic year, very busy year. So before joining HengRui, I was in Big Pharma. I was in J&J for many, many years, 19 years. Before that, spent time in biotechs. So I have a scientific background, PhD in neuropharmacology, but left the lab pretty quickly and joined the business development community and have been doing deals ever since. So great to be here and looking forward to the discussions.
Great. So Frank?
Well, Leon, first, thank you for the invitation. It's my great pleasure. And Jens, great to meet you virtually. Also, hello to all the participants here on the webinar. Frank, I just closed 24 years with McKinsey, including 20 years in China, based in Shanghai and then Hong Kong, where I led for a long time our China life science practice. I had the opportunity of supporting big pharma medtech companies over 2 decades of their China strategy that initially was purely commercial and then expanded into manufacturing and R&D. Also had the opportunity to work with quite a few investors and Chinese biotech as they started to come up. And also was pretty active, I would say, with the BioHelix and the BioCentury colleagues, producing reports every year on the China Bridge to Innovation. I'm sure many of you have seen those reports, where we told the story of a China innovation ecosystem and how it's growing and keeps growing. So very happy to share some thoughts. Those days, I'm actually on a sabbatical. I'm taking a break after McKinsey before I figure out what, if anything, I want to do later on, maybe in Q2 next year. So stay tuned for that. But for now, I'm very happy to share my thoughts.
Fantastic. So most of the audience, I guess, already know me. I'm the co-host and co-founder of BioVerse, also the co-founder of iSuite community. And in addition to that, I'm also the founder of Insights We Trust Advisory, which is an advisory firm focused on East-West licensing and R&D collaborations. All right, with that being said, now you understand why we have Jens and Frank join me. Before we dive into specific topics, I would like to give people a little bit overview of what's really going on. So I'm going to use the coming 5 to 7 minutes, have a quick rundown of major events and some statistics in Asian biotech space in 2025. Here, I want to list a few key events in 2025 in Asian biotech space. First, obviously, I think Asian biotech right now is gradually integrated into the global biotech space. I want to highlight a few East-West news. Again, as you already realized, both Jens, Frank, and myself are deeply in this kind of a deal-making, collaboration, M&A, capital market. So we have a little bit bias, if you may. So we really focus on how the Asia originated particular pharmaceutical innovation get integrated into the global biotech and the pharmaceutical industry. So this first category, East-West news, HER2 continue to make a lot of impacts. Right, we have seen the HER2 slowly moving to the early line of breast cancer and other major solid tumors. And that's actually followed by, I would say, army of Asia-originated ADCs, including some of them actually from HengRui, from Jens' company. Right, really making a lot of news. That's the first East-West news. The second one, I think if you talk about like Asian biotech, the biggest news, especially in development stage, right, must be PD-1 or PD-L1 VEGF story, right? We heard about this story 2 years ago when Akeso and Sami closed the deal, and then since then, the stories are getting better and better. There's more and more players into this space, at least three couples, if you may, three pairs that really leading the whole wave of development in this space. Akeso, Sami, obviously, one of the largest biotech from China and one of the largest actually in the US as well. They are working together. And then shortly after this year, we saw this Biotheus was acquired by BioNTech, and a few months later, they partnered with the BMS over, I think that was a total value over 10 billion collaboration. So now, BioNTech is a PD-L1 VEGF full support from BMS, ADC, and IO franchise. And last but definitely not the least, 3S Bio and Pfizer announced probably the largest deal by upfront payment out of China this year. And I heard Pfizer has opened multiple phase 3 trials globally. And my contact from Harrison Yard, which is the headquarters, said Pfizer assigning their best people from different department to this project, right? This is to tell you this is going to be a very interesting space to watch, and is really led by innovation from China. And of course, there's some other interesting news, right? The first China major M&A, I think that's kind of open a new chapter. People always complain Chinese biotech cannot exit. And so this is one of the large China pharma called Sino Biopharma acquired Lanova, which by the way, also a PD-1 VEGF player. That's one. And the fourth one, that's a pretty big noise when there was a New York Times article talking about there's a draft executive order from Trump administration to ban China license deal. That was pretty strong headwind, sent the Hong Kong Stock Exchange about index down almost 10%. But today, largely recovered. And last one, it's not all good news. There's some not so good news, bad news, I would say. There was a still ongoing lawsuit between Novo Nordisk and KBP, which is a China-originated, Singapore-based biotech company over this 1.3 billion asset acquisition deal. And there was a lot of interesting story over there, and we covered extensively. Now that's the first bucket. Second is a focus on Asia market by themselves. Right, so this is a really very interesting stuff, Asia to Asia or East to East news. The first one, I'm pretty sure Frank gonna provide more color later on. The biotech capital market in Asia this year outperformed the West, right? Especially led by Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Also, The South Korean biotech index doing fairly well as well. And second one, Asian biotech market or domestic drug market always get a lot of criticism for not being very supportive of their innovative drug industry. At least the Japanese government, first of all, they increased their effort to address the drug loss. Actually, I never know about this word until I did some research. They call drug loss because a lot of drugs were approved outside Japan, but never get approved or proven many, many years later in Japan, which is not good for the Japanese patient. Similarly, China are infamous for their brutal price control. They don't want to cover those expensive drugs. And from the latest national drug reimbursement list, they include CAR T, autologous CAR T therapies. So that's a really good sign. So that's something probably Frank can provide more color as well. And the fourth one, China approved the world first in class HKEX and PI3K dual target therapy for B-cell lymphoma. That's very interesting because that's actually before FDA. That's also show the Chinese agency have more confidence now. And the last one, I'm pretty sure Yan can provide more color. This is kind of a Asia to Asia internal deal, right? So like HengRui out licensed their late stage HER2 ADC, I believe that was approved in China already or to Glenmark, not for developed market, but for emerging market. That's kind of interesting. So HengRui cover a lot of space. Again, we can hear more from Jens later on. We're kind of obsessed with the deal making stuff. So I kind of run the number with the help of a shout out to Franck Cube. The one actually really helpful. They gave me all those data cut off for me during the preparation of this webinar. So as of last Friday, I believe that's December 6th, there's 174 deals captured by their database. I want to use the word capture because nobody really know the real number, right? So this really depends on how good the database really is. I think FarmCube is one of the best I've ever used, if not the best, in terms of Asian deals. So 174 breakdown by countries. Obviously, China take the lion's share of it. I think it's like 2/3 of the deals come out of China, followed by South Korea. By Japan and South Korea. That's the total deal. And then the deal value, based on disclosed information and also caveat from PharmaCube's database, China take a vast majority of it, and followed by South Korea, Japan. Others still have a little bit long way to go. So that's pretty much a breakdown. Because of that, obviously, that's why we picked the title, China Take the Central Stage. Let's break down into the elephant in the room, what China is really doing in this case. This is kind of a longitudinal view of China's out licensing performance, especially China to West outbound licensing. It's very clear, loud and clear, 2025, despite all those noise, geopolitical headwind, they set a new record, right? Just look at this is not even like, metaphorical. Hockey stick is real hockey stick. If you look at the past 3 years. Right, a little bit footnote, the 2025 numbers annualize the number based on the data cut off from last Friday. Actually, we know just in this week, there's a few more new deals announced. If I put in latest data, literally a few hours ago, actually they're going to be even higher, right? But you can see clearly there's a very dramatic increase of China to West license deal outbound. If you just look at the number, for PR purpose, we look at the deal value. I think very likely somewhere actually by the end of this year going to be somewhere north of 130 billion total deal value. And upfront payment, like I said, there's a few deals announced in this week. I think probably going to be somewhere 7.4 to 7. Somewhere around 7.4 billion upfront payment in total, out of probably over 130 deals in there. And there's some representative deal. I just want to give a quick shout out, and later on we can dive into this a little bit more. The first one, obviously, the Innovent, the Takeda. The reason I want to pick this one because it's actually Asian to Asian license deal. I know Takeda's headquarters in we're pretty close to where I sit, and where Jens live, right, Boston. But still, technically, it's a Japanese company, right? And HengRui, where Jens know very well, have many footprints in China. So just across a small ocean between these two countries. That's a deal a significant upfront payment and over 10 billion total value, 3 clinical stage assets. The second one, I let Jens tell us more, but that's really, really massive. 12 asset package deal, like over $12 billion. And the last one, like Frank, and I dive a little bit more. I want the people to get a little bit teaser. This one from the PR didn't mention any asset, right? But there's a lot of interesting stuff between this Kite Pharma and the Pregen deal for the in vivo CAR T. So I'll let Frank provide more colors. With that being said, now let's move to the second phase. Really, we highlight a lot of deals. So right now, let's let those like insider and also the people who direct in the table share their insights about those interesting deals. So on this page, I will really leave to Jens and Frank to drive the conversation. I'll let Jens talk about all the deals he made from HengRui. There's probably more I didn't capture, so please, feel free to chime in. So Jens, floor is yours.
Thank you, and there are indeed a few more, but let's focus on some of these. But let's take a step back and maybe focus on where HengRui is now, because we are on a journey to go from a strong domestic player to become a relevant global player, and deal making is going to be a significant part of our toolkit, I would say. So right now we deploy 3 different deal structures, a little bit generic, but so the first one we do is straight licenses. But all of these tools, I would say, have all a role in taking HengRui global, right? The MSD from $2 billion deal, right, is a straight license, but it's an opportunity for us to advance our assets outside China, right, where we do not have a lot of capabilities at this point here. The same for the deal with Glenmark. The second deal structure we deploy right now is the new co-creation. And that's an opportunity to maybe pool a few compounds, right? Make a little portfolio, work with significant venture firms to drive the development ex-China and establish a team. There, of course, we have the opportunity also to get equity and enjoy a potential significant upside as well. And then the last deal structure here, and this is the GSK type agreements. That's what we could call our strategic collaborations. And besides the license component and the financial components, we try to build in a few important tools. And one of them in this setup here is actually the ability for HengRui to grow our early development capabilities outside China. So through this collaboration, we'll work with GSK to slowly grow our presence and our development capabilities early on. So besides that, it is a massive deal, and the total deal value is actually 12.5 if you add the upfront payment. So definitely a significant deal, and I would say you don't do a deal like this without having absolute alignment between the two parties, right, at all levels, both the BD teams, the R&D teams, and also the senior management. So it's a lot of efforts to get this together. But we were actually able to do this in a fairly short time. So we had some early alignment meetings in the beginning of the year, and started the diligence and the co-creation of the deal structure that led to our deal in end of July here, where it was announced this year. So really a significant deal for us, and it's actually an excellent platform for us to both get more insights in how Big Pharma works on first-in-class, best-in-class, and certainly also how we can grow our development capabilities. So I would say if we look a little bit ahead, we will continue to do these strategic collaboration models where we'll continue to build additional capabilities. Eventually, we'll have late-stage development capabilities and also commercial presence and capabilities. So let me pause here and maybe hand it over to Frank.
Yeah, probably you can spend a couple more minutes right here, since you said, obviously you have more than we listed here. So how many actually you really have done public disclosure? I'm pretty sure I have a few.
Yeah, no, I think one I think is worth mentioning that is actually quite unique for HengRui is a domestic deal where we teamed up with German Merck for a small molecule GnRH oral GnRH molecule for infertility. So German Merck is the market leader in this space here, and it's just an obvious choice for us to team up with Merck for this product. So even if it's in the Chinese market, so I would say that's a unique deal. But I would say some of the more interesting ones are the newcos. I also want to mention Braveheart Bio, right? So that we put together with Forbion and Orbimed and a few others. And again, here, a lot of good momentum, a lot of interest, a lot of focus on execution. So great setup and a great team they're building now with Travis as the CEO here.
Yeah, so probably Frank, if you have any question to Jens, I will probably let you ask first. I'm pretty sure you do. Before I ask probably one questions after you.
Well, I mean, I guess the question I would have for HengRui is, how do you get to the US market? In a way that you can actually start to build capabilities there, a little bit, I guess, like Innovent is doing with Takeda, right? Because end of the day, and we'll talk about that more later, the economic profit of the industry, the global industry, is the US. And if you want to really extract great value from deals, you need to have a direct participation there. So I'm a little bit curious about how you see that journey for HengRui going forward.
I think, and you're right, we'll talk a little bit more about this later in this call here. So co-development is an obvious partnership model, I would say, where we team up with significant players where we both can learn, but also share risk in the ex-China development. So that's an obvious scenario. Eventually, we also want to do our own in-house global development, and that's why we are building capabilities. But we prefer to do it in a, I would say, controlled manner. But there is also opportunities, to accelerate certain activities by M&A scenarios, by more significant partnerships. So all of those are elements we are evaluating.
Sounds good. So I have also a follow-up question, especially about your new call, right? So I mean, obviously, the Braveheart was announced this year, but another new call you made last year actually made a big headline this year, which is a Kylera. And I also saw you invited Kylera's CEO to your R&D day, and he gave a really high mark about what HengRui was able to help Kylera. So for people who don't know their story, Kylera was launched last year with I believe, 4 obesity asset from HengRui, right? That was launched with the $400 million Series A. That's already blown a lot of people out of water. And what happened this year, they have a full-on financing of $1 billion, right? So, and I believe from the slide deck they presented to the investor, they expect the first drug to be approved on the market by 2027 in this really hot obesity space. So, with that as a background and your Braveheart, can you tell us what kind of this typical dynamics, how HengRui or like typically China, leading China biotech, biopharma decide which one they're going to work with to create a new call? Obviously, a new call, the upfront payment is much smaller. What would make you feel this new call partnership is really attractive? What's a key feature are you looking for?
So I would say specific for Kylera, so that was a company that was created together with Bain Capital. So they are really a significant player and very attractive to work with, right? And they know what they're doing. So we're very comfortable working with them. And they also have access to, a great leadership team, right? It's a Cerevel. So Ron Renaud is this former CEO of Cerevel, and now he's leading Kylera. So already a well-established leadership team that is ready to execute. I would say when we explore partnerships, we often run both straight licensing discussions and potential new co-creations in parallel. So it's not always we allocate certain assets for one or the other model. So we often explore them in parallel. And then we decide what makes more sense for the specific assets. And when we look at both the capabilities of the partners, the access to funding, the ability to execute, etc. So it's a number of elements. So that actually drives our decision. But we do try to create some broad interest in our assets, so we have the opportunity to negotiate and optimize our scenario.
Fantastic. So now let's move to Franck. You have a tool interesting still to talk about. Please take away.
Sure. And before I talk a little bit about those two specific deals, right? I think if we step back, I think Leon already shared quite a few interesting statistics. Let me add a few to that. China today is more than 30% of the global pipeline. 1/3 of the China pipeline is next-gen modalities. China is already the majority of ADCs in development. It's 1/3 of CGT programs in development. It's even 15% of radioligand programs, right? 53% of what China does is oncology, which means that 47% is not oncology. And I think people underestimate how much is coming from China in immunology, in metabolic, in CNS even, right? So it's been largely an oncology story so far, and even the cases we have here on the page are largely oncology. But if you really look at what's going on, it's going to go much beyond oncology. You could argue that today China is the early stage development lab of the world already, right? And that's a position that is really clearly established today. What's also striking to me, that played out particularly in 2025, is that the number and range of participants in this market is mushrooming. It used to be just some of the big pharmas who were interested in China assets. Now we have newcos, we have more investors coming in, we have increasingly mid and even small-sized biotech from North America and from Europe who are interested. You have big companies like even Blackstone getting into the game. You have new funds that are being set up specifically to play on this China to the West trend. It's incredible, the amount of activity. And I would say that it is both exciting, but also a little bit scary at some level, because you have to wonder where this is going in terms of the number of assets that are being out-licensed, the number of participants in the market, the valuation of those assets, but also the herding that we are seeing across some modalities and some TAs. And also, quite frankly, thinking forward, how many of those assets actually will make it to approval, right? Because the FDA continues to approve, 50, 55 assets a year. This hasn't changed for the last 10 years. We have a real bottleneck coming up down the road, right? But for now, there's certainly extremely exciting activity. And the two deals we have here that have been picked are both of them very interesting. The first one, Kelun Crescent, is, to my knowledge, the first real asset swap collaboration that we have seen. And what's interesting as well is that it's done between two companies that are not among the biggest names. But Crescent Biopharma is a relatively small player from what I understand. Kelun is a little bit well known in China, but it's also not one of the biggest players. So you see two companies like this from the West and from the East coming together through a very creative deal, right? That gives them an opportunity to combine promising assets to maybe get an edge in terms of global development program. What's also interesting to me is the valuation of those assets. Like both companies actually are paying upfront a sum of money to the other partner. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Kelun Biotech is paying Crescent 20 million upfront for the greater China rights of CR001, whereas Kelun is paying Crescent 80 million upfront for the rights to SKB105. So a ratio 1-4 just on the China versus US valuation. And if you look at the milestones, the deal is also extremely skewed towards the US potential of a combination, right? And the China one is a much smaller, which I think is interesting because it shows again the imbalance that we have right now between China and the US. which is also driving a lot of this deal activity. The Chinese companies, and this was a little bit my question to Jens, even on HengRui, which is a very established, very successful company. Still, if you want to be a big player in this industry, you need to crack the US market. That's where the profit is. Right? And it means that in some cases, some of those deals east to west are maybe unbalanced, I guess, in terms of valuation. The CAD pharma pre-gene is interesting because obviously in vivo CAR-T is extremely hot and very promising. And we have here a company like Pregene who is able to come in as a co-development partner to CAD Pharma/Gilead by bringing a technology, a platform basically, right, that is seen as cutting edge and really promising in a very hot and very advanced new modality. So I think this is an example of how China can actually be at the cutting edge actually of development. I think there's still a perception that China is a lot of me too, me better. I think we are starting to see real breakthrough in technologies, in platform, on AI drug discovery as well, for example, with a partnership between Silico and Lilly. So there's a lot of interesting deals coming up that show that China has the ability to really be at the forefront of innovation, which I think is also a key message that I hope you can take from this conversation. Leon?
Yeah, fantastic. Any question, Jens? You have for Frank? No? Okay. So, Jens, please go ahead.
Oh, a quick one. Actually, building on your question to me, right? So most Chinese companies are not going to go truly global without taking US as a future market, right? So what are the best examples for companies, maybe Asian companies, you've seen that are addressing the US market?
So first, my own position on this is very clear. I think the industry overall, the global biopharma, biotech industry, has a US market addiction problem. I say that because if you look at data, revenues contribution from the US market keeps rising year after year. I think we are today, if you take the top 20 big pharma companies of the world, about 55 to 58% of their revenues come from the US market. If you look at profit, it's pretty north of 80%, maybe close to 90%, right? And that's for actually a pretty small population. So we think about this industry as global. It is not really global. If you look at what's going on in terms of the economics, it is really a US market. And everything else is not irrelevant. China is relevant. Japan is relevant. Germany is relevant. The UK and France are kind of borderline relevant. The rest of the world is just completely irrelevant to the economics of this industry. It's all about the US, right? Which means that all the strategy of big pharma companies and even the biotech companies are driven by what's happening in the US. And I think that's not healthy. It's not healthy for the industry. It's not healthy for patients worldwide. So to your question, I'm hoping, and I think so far the only company I can think of that has been able to do that is Beijing/B1, as they are known now, right? I think they have been able to crack the US market on the back of a very interesting asset, Brukinsa, right, which is quite successful. I think they are trying to change the game in terms of access in the rest of the world. We're building a presence in Latin America and Southeast Asia and Europe. They are trying to leverage a very broad global development infrastructure, right? That gives them an advantage. So they think. But I think we're just at the beginning. I'm hoping that China will not be happy just being the early stage development lab of the world, which really means the early stage development lab of the US market. I'm hoping that the Chinese company will be able to have a much broader ambition, which is to change access to innovation for broad population around the world. That's what I hope to see happen in the next decade. I'm hoping that HengRui will be one of the companies who can actually do that.
Certainly hope so too.
Yeah, totally echo what Frank said. I think if you look at the current status of China or China biotech biopharma industry, HengRui probably is the best candidate in terms of your dry powder, everything, right? I remember your revenue right now is pretty much on par or even like higher than Beijing, and the majority of revenue come from innovative drugs, right? So you know how to sell drug and make money. Just have to learn like a little bit different strategy how to open the US drug industry, and you guys have been trying, right? I mean, there's like some progress, some like setback, but I guess the persistence is amazing. Don't forget, HengRui is much older company than B1. It's like almost 60 years old, right? So like 55 or something like that. So, you guys
Sure.
have patience. All right, so now it's my turn. I really have one case study. It's really fresh story. Literally, the PR came out, I think like a few hours ago. So the company, nobody knew about this company until last Friday. The company called On the Road Therapeutics, short for OTR Therapeutics. This is actually this represent a new kind of a biotech business model, if I may. So the company came out of a stealth mode last Friday through the PR. They raised a mega round, which is really popular in the global biotech market. They started with 100 million Series A, led by some pretty impressive syndicate, particularly Pfizer Ventures. Right, that's their major Western investor. That was already everyone's like, oh my God, what is this? I even wrote a newsletter about this, how their new model last week. Really, they talk about, you know what, they're gonna take their business models to take like early stage assets around the world, doesn't matter where they come from, and leverage Chinese like fast and cost-effective R&D and bring those assets, push those assets to like value inflection point, and then partner out to a big pharma. So that's their idea, right? I say, oh, everyone's like, okay, that's a great idea, get some money, so what? Then only 6 days later, they announced their first deal with Zealand Pharma, right, which is a Denmark company. And I just literally finished the PR. That's exactly what they proposed. They said they're gonna do. That's exactly what they did. So they have they said that they're gonna have a multiple programs out licensed to Zealand, also do co-development with the Zealand, fully leverage Chinese like a efficient R&D capability. And because of that, they get some upfront payment. They get a milestone. Total value over deal value is 2.5 billion. What a story, right? We always know, like in the West, biotech launch with a good story, raise money, and then oftentimes they didn't deliver, right? But this is probably just to my knowledge, probably Frank, you are in the industry much longer, know better story. This is the shortest from idea to validation in 6 days. I mean, of course, the true stories, the founder told us actually the financing was closed a few months ago. They're just too busy, probably closing the deal to make the announcement. But still, from like outside, from this two headline, just looks very stunning. I'll stop right here. I know this is a developing news. Jens and Frank, any comments you may have on this one?
I think this is just another example for how dynamic the China biotech environment is right now and how fast everything is moving. So it's super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's again an example that, I mean, every week now at this point, I think every day almost, Leon, you have to write something interesting about something interesting that just happened. And this is like a tsunami coming. Again, my question, and it links a little bit to an article I wrote recently for BioCentury, named the China Biopharma Octagon. How much competition, how much intensity do we see coming out of China that is not just going to transform the Chinese biopharma market itself, but is going to really impact global? As you know, Leon, some investors in the US are worried about what's happening in China. They think it is unfair competition coming from China. They think maybe some of the Chinese companies are moving so fast. Are they cutting corners? I mean, there's a lot of, chatter like that in the US. And we know that there is tensions between the US and China on biotech, right? So I think all of this is very exciting. At the same time, I wonder at times if too much success too quickly by China is not going to be counterproductive in some of the relationship with the US, and if that could not trigger some reaction actually by the Trump administration. I think that's something to watch for sure.
Yeah, great. Okay, that's all the slides I have. Let's move to the, oh, sorry. This like a stop sharing, that just a chat other topics. I guess, we have some agenda, before our webinar. The next one, I believe, is a capital market, right? So we'll talk about a little bit about capital market. I'll probably again, I'll cue Jens first because, you guys set another record. You have the largest IPO Hong Kong Stock Exchange in healthcare in the past 5 years. So tell us what happened with HengRui. I also, by the way, give people a little bit teaser. For a few months, HengRui by market cap is the #1 largest pharma based in Asia, actually bigger than Takeda. and Astella and Daiichi. Today probably be smaller. I didn't check it yet, but please tell us.
So no, so we're very proud of that the Hong Kong IPO, right? That was back in May. Super good interest the whole way, very strong interest both from institutional and retail investors, right? So very strong first trading day, ended up plus 25%, I believe it was, right? And it's continued. Hopefully also helped a little bit by our deal flow, but we have had a very strong year also on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So I think when we talk about why we did it, right? That's really to first advance our pipeline on a broader level, right? But also to support the globalization, and then with now about 1.3 initial raise in the bank, right? We are in good position to continue to invest both in the pipeline and also our global expansion.
Yeah, fantastic. Also, I remember you have a lot of international cornerstone investor, right? So quite different kind of investor makeup compared to typical China biotech. I think that's another thing. I personally heard a lot of Western investors actually super interested and also invested in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange biotech IPO of a China, largely China-based company. Particularly, I remember I read your S1. It's pretty impressive, the investor you got, both from the US, from Europe, and from Singapore, from Middle East. They're very interesting. Anyway, so thank you for the starting. Very, very impressive case study. Poor Frank, you have been in this space for more than 20 years. Tell us what's happening. Why all of a sudden it's kind of a sort of come from nowhere or something? Probably you know what's really going on.
Yeah, I think, if we look at what happened, right, it's good to rewind the movie. I think, between 2017 and 2020, we had a massive wave of investment in China biotech. And actually, we had a chapter 17 or 18, the Hong Kong Exchange opening, right? And the first wave of IPOs, many of them quite successful for some time. And then we had the capital market winter, right, for a period of time. I think from 2022, 2023 were pretty bad for different reasons, COVID, but also, quite frankly, the environment overall for biotech worldwide wasn't great for a period of time, right? Higher interest rate, etc. The Hong Kong Exchange pretty much shut down for a period of time. And the market cap of the companies that were listed depreciated dramatically. I think many companies lost 70-80% of their value over a period of 2 to 3 years, right? So what we see happening now in 25 is a correction back to, I guess, more healthy valuations. And on the back of that, a reopening of the Hong Kong Exchange, which I think this year will end up as the largest exchange in the world for biotech IPOs, by far, actually, ahead of NASDAQ, right? So, it's a correction. It's a welcome correction because in the 2022 to 24 period of time, in particular during COVID, I think a lot of very exciting and very creative new companies have been formed. And they now finally find a way to get to a public market, which is great news. I think we have to see how the momentum carries forward. I think there's a long list of candidates who are hoping to list in 2026. I think on the equity market, I think there's some hope that the 2026 could also be a good year for Chinese equity. I think there's some reason to believe that could happen, maybe a rebalancing from investors from the very hot US market towards emerging markets like China. That could happen. So we could certainly see another good year in 2026, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the hope. Now, as always, those things come and go. You always have waves of good years and bad years in IPOs. And so we'll see if the one that IPO'd in 25 can sustain their value and have a good value story over multiple years, which was not the case for the ones that IPO'd earlier in the 2021, 2022 period of time. So the hope is that the quality of company that they're listed now is higher, actually. Right? The CEOs are more agile, the companies are more resilient, there's more differentiation in the assets. So the flight to quality hopefully will prop up the valuation of those companies. At the same time, I think my concern or the watch out, I think, would be the value that this company can derive from the China market versus the hope they have to bring their assets to global market. right? I think the elephant in the room around Chinese innovation is that the Chinese market itself is just too small, right? It's probably between 15 to maximum 20 billion US dollar today, which is a fraction of the total market, right? And it's probably the 6th or 7th largest innovation market in the world, still beyond Japan, still beyond Germany. And yes, it's growing. Access conditions are improving. I think somebody in the chat room was asking about the NRDL. Yes, okay, NRDL was updated again, great. But NRDL landing is still too slow, right? Yes, commercial health insurance is coming, but nobody knows exactly how it's going to be implemented, right? And pricing in China is just too low. It's probably too high in the US, but it's certainly too low in China, right? And my personal hope is that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see an acceleration of progress in market access in China, which could be the condition for a much more sustainable and healthy capital market to support Chinese companies. Because I think if they are largely dependent on a US story, I think that's a risky position to have, given the relationship between China and the US and where that could go.
Yeah, I want to echo with the 2 points. First of all, not just China is a little bit challenging, right? Japan, South Korea, the same thing. Per capita, expense of innovative drugs is very low, right? I mean, in a sense, that's why Takeda, or like Stella, Daiichi were forced to explore global market. Otherwise, they couldn't grow, right? The revenue, the profit, let's just focus on profit. They were generating from Japan domestic market is not enough. There's never enough for them to become real big company. I think HengRui pretty much on the same stage now, right? So, but the difference probably HengRui have licensing revenue to really kind of bridge the gap, but you have to face the same challenge as well. Looks like the US market will not dramatically, let's say, reduce by 50%. I don't think that's going to happen. There's just too much vested interest over there. So that's number one I want to echo. So the Asian market really is kind of, they have to break into the US. China's doing that. Everyone's doing that. The second one, I want to echo Frank, your comments about the capital market in Hong Kong. I want to share some of the chatter I heard from the US, particularly from Wall Street. I think typically people believe the US stock market next year, very high chance going to have a correction because it's too expensive. A lot. I mean, if you ask the people, almost everyone agree. I would say vast majority agree there's a bubble in the US stock market. So they are looking for rotating out of the US stock market to somewhere else. Just looking at PE, the US stock market's PE is much, much higher than Hong Kong, than Europe, than all those major like stock exchange. So that's a macro environment. And another thing I think I also want to mention, I think a lot of investors in the US, they're just scratching their head. They don't know how to invest in the US because one major thing is that I would say the regulatory geopolitical environment for biotech in the US is so bad. Just looking at FDA, what happened, FDA in this year, just drama and drama and drama and drama, right? So the investors really, they just sit on their chair, don't want to do anything. So that also kind of, I heard some investors, especially they know about China, know about the Asian market. We already saw some of them start become the pre-IPO or cornerstone investor of a company listed in Hong Kong. Actually, there's even some US biotech company thinking about listing in Hong Kong, not in NASDAQ, because it's all those crazy stuff over there, right? So we don't know that's gonna happen yet. We heard a rumor. Remember, people said Legend may be coming back to Hong Kong. That's a rumor. We don't know whether it's true or not. They have their own thing. If that happened, that could be very interesting. So NASDAQ would have some, not a serious, but at least some potential competitor in terms of listing for biotech, at least for European, right? We don't know. So that's a message, chatter I have heard from Wall Street. By the way, for the audience really interested in this topic, we actually did a webinar a few months ago, exactly focused on Hong Kong Stock Exchange and biotech boom. So you can go to our YouTube channel, look at that webinar, have a lot of background, historic reason why we have this booming Hong Kong stock market right now for biotech. Anyway, that's my 2 quick echoes and comments. Jens, I say you unmute yourself. Any comments from you before we move on?
No, I'm good for now.
Right, so that's exciting. Now let's move down our agenda. What's next? Oh yeah, the overview of Asian regulatory updates and the market access. We already talked about this a little bit. I'll get started with the streamlined investigator-initiated study, particularly in China. So we also wrote a newsletter about this. Actually, quite exciting stuff. As I think 3 months ago, the Chinese government issued this kind of updated guideline how to conduct pretty much how to conduct first-in-human trial in the academic setting. Right before people heard about this, Chinese unique advantage. That's where like Legend actually really kind of made a thing, right? Like in 2017, they did an IIT 100% OR of Carvicti, and since then, that's like well known in our industry. But still, there's a lot of crazy stuff. You probably remember China have this infamous CRISPR baby, right? So the PI CRISPR the two like embryo, human embryo, and have two born young little girls, and they CRISPR out their gene in order to treat their AIDS potential risk. That was really, really bad. Since then, there's a lot of a kind of a soul searching reflection, and then a few months ago, China really streamlined the how to do investigator-initiated study. So what I took from that is really right now, it's very clear who is responsible, who is paying this. If things goes wrong, who's going to be, taken, hold accountable. That's number one. Number two, the scope actually expand beyond cell and gene therapy and mRNA. That's my understanding. Multiple sources told me if you really have an innovative asset, even if it's not a cell and gene therapy, even if it's not mRNA, even if it's not in vivo CAR T, you could use this in IIT pathway as well. And since then, what happens? There's an explosion of Western companies, both biotech and the big pharma, seeking to do IIT in China, right? Including, the deals we talk about, right? The Kite Pharma, Pregene deal, and also even the OTR Therapeutics in their thesis, that's their strategy. So that's quite interesting. And also, I think the China FDA, NMPA, that's how we call them, they also give themselves hard deadline, right? Once you submit your application, by what time they have to give you a response. It's quite different from FDA, I have to say. Sometimes, FDA used to be the gold standard. I think it's still by far the best, but I think the gap between the Asian regulator, especially China regulator, and the FDA is getting smaller and smaller. So I wish FDA, kind of wake up, realize they also have a competition. So that's my quick comments about the streamlined IIT and the more efficient regulator, especially in China. So if there's any the update from other market, Frank, I'm pretty sure feel free to chime in. Okay, so no comments, but the second bullet point is really is Frank, your specialty. About improving like Asian market access, right? So you said there's still some challenge. Are there some bright lights you think we can be a little bit hopeful?
Yeah, I think there's, on access itself, I mentioned already the need for, if the US is probably too high, China is certainly too low, right? Europe is too low, probably as well, but there's not much hope of Europe being able to spend more money on innovation. I know that the UK is kind of sending some signals they may be willing to do that, but if you look at the situation in Europe and the budgetary deficits that they are running and the need to rebuild the army in countries, I think it's very unlikely that we will see a significant increase or even a marginal increase in how much money European markets are willing to put beyond innovation. China hopefully will make a bit of a move. I'm hoping that there will be an improvement there. It's for the benefit not just of multinationals selling drugs in China, it's really at the core for the benefit of Chinese biotech companies and even companies a bit bigger like HengRui, who do need to have a more healthy local market to support their innovation investments and make them less reliant on the US market, right, for value creation. I think that's what needs to happen. Beyond that, I think I have two messages of hope, actually. One of them is I see that multinationals are starting to embrace China beyond the impact that China can have on their pipeline. I see them starting to realize that the ways of working of China can actually have a massive impact on their own ways of working. And they are starting to think about how they can inject some Chinese DNA into their global teams. And I think that's going to be a very exciting development. And it's going to mirror what is happening in the automobile market in EVs. I just read an article today showing some of the Chinese companies who have invested in Mercedes, the German car companies, and are starting to change the way those German companies are working and make them more competitive. And I think, here there's a huge unlock of value that could be created for the industry if the big multinationals were to learn from the Chinese companies how to streamline processes, maybe change ways of working, and just become much more efficient, which hopefully could benefit patients worldwide. So that's one. The second one is I'm hoping we are going to see a new breed of biotech start to emerge. Companies that are not American, not Chinese, not European, but are truly global in nature, agnostic of where the capabilities and talents can come from. Like I'm hoping we're going to see some investors and entrepreneurs who just want to build the best team possible and will just take the capabilities where they are. And I think we're going to start to see those type of companies emerge, and I think they will be very successful. And they will be faster, leaner, hungrier. And China will play a huge role in that. And Asia more broadly, by the way. So those two themes, I think how multinational will start to take some DNA from China to impact their global operations, and how we are going to start to see a new breed of hybrid global biotech emerge in the next few months.
Fantastic. I think Frank, you did a perfect job to combine the second last and last topic together. You already gave you some like a perspective of the future. So let's do that together. Jens, what's your comments? What do you see in the future? What's your vision? Let's jump to the last topic.
Yeah, I think I do want to comment on Frank's first comment around that the pharmaceutical industry can learn a lot from the way Chinese biotechs and pharma companies execute. There's just such an extreme focus on execution and speed that is so unique, and that's one of the competitive advantages right now, right? And it was actually one of the focus points when we had our discussions with GSK. We were very careful not to get sucked into their governance structure, because if we suddenly had to follow too many steps that we're not used to, then we would eventually lose our competitive edge on the speed, right? So I think there's a lot of learnings that ex-China companies can take from their ability to execute. So super interesting. I think so. Looking into the future, I think there's a super interesting future in the transition from being a China-focused industry or companies like HengRui to become a global relevant player. And there are a number of different ways it's being executed right now, and we are trying to take it slowly. We have a very significant pipeline, and we cannot afford developing the full pipeline ex-China, right? So we are doing partnerships. We're selecting assets for our own development, and we want to do it in I would say, in a way where we can follow our own growth as well. So we don't want to rush. We've had some experience in the past that led to a lot of nothing, and we want to learn from that and do it slowly but surely. So I think that transition from being a China-focused company to becoming a global player is going to be super interesting for a lot of the Chinese-based companies.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm gonna share my probably 5 sentences how I look at this. I think there's a new business model. Exactly, I will put a little bit more color as what Frank said. There's a truly global, neither U.S. nor China nor European biotech. What happens? I think I always tell people, for people who are not familiar with the drug development, I say innovative drug development is like baking a cake, right? You need the 3 things. You need a recipe. You need a chef. You need a kitchen. Right, so the recipe, I think Western companies, especially US, where I see it like a pretty close to Kindle Square, that's where they really have a pretty clear advantage, come up with a really good recipe based on innovative science and breakthrough. And also in the US and to a large extent Europe as well, they have a lot of very experienced chefs, right? Not everyone can really make a good dish out of a good recipe. People never forget that, right? Like HengRui Calera, you run by some really good chef, right? So that's a chef that the Western have a really advantage. Now, if you're talking about efficient kitchen with a bunch of hardworking assistants, China for now It's pretty competitive, especially early stage, right? So what happens, you take a Western recipe, send your Western chef to Chinese kitchen in China, half bake your cake, right? Half bake, take them back to the US or Europe, finish with icing. It's like a cost-effective, beautifully looking, delicious European or American cake for largely American patients. So I think that kind of business model doesn't matter where you legally belong to, going to become more and more dominant because that's a kind of efficient way to really leverage everything, right? You have the innovation from the West, execution from the East, and the market go back to the West. Right, so I think that's where I think going to be a lot of a company like that today. Again, OTR Therapeutics deal is a really good example. I think we're going to see more and more like that. With that being said, last question, really quick bullet point: yes or no, and a one sentence explanation. How do you see the geopolitical impact in this kind of Asia biotech or like a East-West collaboration, especially China to West collaboration? Yes or no, you think it's a positive or negative, and then tell me one sentence why.
I've not seen the big impact of the dynamic, so I would say neutral.
Neutral. Good. Frank?
It's a very difficult one. I think there will be some curtailing on some activities in biotech, but not a blanket curtailing. I think some companies are going to be targeted, maybe some specific technology that is deemed as more sensitive by the US Defense Department. I think some of that will happen. I think there are too many people in the US pushing for that, right? At the same time, I don't believe in a blanket, broad-based, ban of Chinese biotech in the US. I think there's too much benefit for patients. Also, I always come back to that story. Can you imagine, Leon, if in 5 years, US patients have to go to Cuba to get access to the best drug for lung cancer because that drug wouldn't have been developed by a Chinese company and would not be available in the US market? I mean, this cannot happen. The best science will always win. The best drugs will always fund their market and the patients. So I don't think it can be stopped, but I think it will be a little bit curtailed on the edges where the technology is deemed as more sensitive.
Yeah. So for me, I think it's going to be more positive than before. Why do I say that? I think, I follow the money for the financial numbers, right? I think right now the value distribution kind of makes sense between China and Europe and the United States. Why do I say that? Give one number. If you look at M&A, a real cash total value of this year, probably somewhere around 150 billion US dollar. That's M&A. Most money go to US investor. Yes, China have outlicensed a lot of assets, including some of them from HengRui. How much upfront payment cash Chinese company really got? About 7 billion. It's less than 5% of what the majority US investor really got, despite all those headlines, right? So the US is a capitalistic free market economy. So, the investors are making money, most of the money still. So I think, because of that, and also the investor may make more money, like a Calera, those kind of stuff. So I think the value distribution makes sense for now. That's why I'm like a cautiously optimistic. I think that.
But you're
probably,
not.
Go ahead.
You're not worried though, Leon? I mean, we know that some VCs in the US believe that the Chinese biotech have unfair advantages somehow, and a lot of investments that were made in some US biotech are kind of wasted at this point. I mean, there's a lot of questions about, many US-based biotech that just can't compete or are becoming irrelevant to some extent. That's going to hurt some of investors in the US, right? So how are we going to address that?
Right.
I think, how do you see that?
Yeah, I always like to quote this one line from someone. I don't know who said that. It said like a change is the only constant in biotech industry, right? They're always changing, right? There's always someone going to be a loser. Let's just go back to your question, Frank, in terms of investor. There's a different type of investor. Look at an investor who really make a lot of money. What the business model really help them make money is this buy and build model, right? Look at Macera, look at the Kira, look at 89 Bio, look at Boston Pharmaceutical, right? Look at this Intracellular, right? They're all like multi-billion, 10 billion acquisition. Where did those innovations come from? Didn't come from the biotech themselves. They bought from somewhere else. So that's where, they can put if you really follow their wallet, right? Their wallet doesn't come from like the story they like to tell the public. right? So those, don't forget, those investors also have a lobby power. There's some investor that do like, classic de novo biotech, definitely gonna lose out. Like I said, they can take their, recipe to China, right? They don't need to develop in Kendall Square, which is a cost of 5 times analyst more and 3 times slower, right? Then they work with the HengRui or like a CRO in Shanghai, right? You need to change, you need to adapt. If you don't want to adapt, R Capital is adapting, Bain Capital is adapting, General Atlantic is adapting, right? The investor can leave you behind. You cannot say, this has been working for me, I don't want to change, refuse to change, the industry going to move on. That's how I look at this. All right, so we run actually over time. We do want to leave some time, to the Q&A. So you guys already saw the Q&A. There's a lot of questions. Feel free to address. You can address, tell whose question come from, and you just answer live. Feel free to pick. There's 5 questions over there. So probably I can start, I can read a question to the audience. So this first one is from, all of them actually from two person. First one from like a Vele, they say to Jens, what does it mean to do self-development ex-China in a controlled manner? Could you please explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, happy to. And I think, yeah, controlled is really not to go crazy, right? To invest in a way where we can follow the growth. So it's really just to follow a sensible growth pattern outside China. So we do have, as I mentioned, a very healthy pipeline, and if we try to develop most of those assets outside China, we'll run out of cash. And I think there's also a little bit of a challenge, because one of the unique things about the China development space is the lower cost, right? Ex-China cost is significantly more expensive. So we want to be cautious. We want to be smart in the way we develop our own pipeline outside China.
So there's one from Vinay again. How are institutional investors different in HengRui than institutional investors in Japanese firms like Takeda, Daiichi, and Astellas? Pretty much ask an institutional investor makeup. I don't know whether you can answer that. If you don't know, just say, I don't know.
I don't know the Takeda Daiichi investors. I do know we have a very broad international base of institutional investors, and we like that.
Okay. So this is going to be a last question. Oh, by the way, Frank, feel free to chime in. Beside this one's for Anis Fahadi Sadi. Sorry if I butcher your name, I apologize. Besides potential US backlash to China-based innovation, such as a biosecurity towards outsourcing CRO, CDMO, blah, 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 what other challenge are you anticipating for the growing Chinese biopharma biotech landscape from the US, I guess?
Yeah. I think so. Again, I think the China market for innovation is just too small right now. And so that people understand, the only companies who are able to make money in the China market are the big players. Companies like HengRui, I suppose, is making money in the China market. I don't know if Jens can share that information. The big pharma companies, the big multinational are making money because they have a large portfolio and they can spread their fixed cost and infrastructure cost over many, many drugs. The small multinationals or mid-sized multinationals have like pretty crappy P&Ls in China, and the small Chinese biotechs cannot launch 1 or 2 products and make any money in China. That's a major issue. The second big challenge I see is herding. I mean, it's great to see like a bunch of deals, for example, in GLP-1s being announced. I think just 2 were announced in the last 2 to 3 days. But I just wonder how many more are in the pipeline. And at some level, how many of those GLP-1s are we going to see reach the market and make money for their investors? I think that's a big question as well. This will take time to play out because all the assets that are being outsourced or licensed tend to be early stage assets. So by definition, we have quite a few years before we see the game play out. But we may be at risk of a replay of what we have seen in PD-1s. With just too many PD-1s in the market and pricing going down, down, down. That's the tendency in China. This is what I talk about in my Octagon article. The rest to the bottom that is plaguing too many industries in China. How do we avoid that in the biotech industry? That's a real question.
All right, fantastic. We like run through all the Q&A run over time, but I still need you guys to stay here for one more minute. Give a little bit shout out the future program. So let me just share my screen one more time. Oh, by the way, first of all, you say both Jens and Frank referenced a lot of sources. In order, I'll put all the link on our LinkedIn page under this event. So please do visit our LinkedIn page of this particular event. I'm gonna share the fantastic articles of Frank and all the other sources Jens mentioned because I missed one deal from Jens. I put right there so people know Henry did a China to China deal. All those things gonna be there, but on our LinkedIn page under this event. This is the first thing. Second thing, right? This is really to our new audience, right? We do have a pipeline of our webinar coming out. As you can see here, we have one already decided. Actually, the website for our JP Morgan recap webinar in collaboration with IO360 already online. You can go there, check out who's going to be speaking over there. So that's the first one. Now we're going to talk about, dive into the clinical trial capability in Asian countries, how they enable that. That's another one. So this is a second shout out. The third one, JP Morgan is around the corner. And as a tradition, ISWE community have our in-person networking WeChat group. And I just checked a moment ago, we have over 230 confirmed in-person attendee in the group already. I say, yes, you're not there yet. I'm going to drag you in. So it's going to be 231. So please join us, mingle with all those Asian biotech executives and the investors and the Western executives who are interested in Asian biotech. And again, go to our website, contact me to get a hand of that. And finally, this for those who want to watch the replay, if you are based in the US or like Western, have access to YouTube, this replay going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel today. For those from Asia, our 5 or 6 Asian-based partner are going to replay this in the coming 2 days, so you will not miss it. So you tell YouTube, either YouTube or Asian-based multimedia collaborator going to be where we are. And finally, we are nonprofit. We don't make money. Well, our financial resources come from donation. Just give you a short shout out, BioVerse, our flagship program. We have a newsletter. We have a lot of WeChat, WhatsApp communities. Please come over and support us. Send your inquiries to sponsorship@iswtc.org to learn more. Or if you have any question from today, also send to that email address. That's where we have. All right, that's all we have today. And thank you so much, Jens and Frank. That's a fantastic discussion. Like I said, this is our signature year-end webinar, and we set a new record for 2025.
Thank you so much, Leon.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.